how about this? How about a brand new, full-featured, next-generation role-playing game in the launch window? Morrowind was one of the best-selling role-playing games ever on the Xbox. The sequel to this incredible game is called Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. It promises to feature one of the largest open-ended worlds ever created for a video game. It also includes thousands of characters that are governed by groundbreaking AI. These characters eat, sleep, and complete tasks all around the clock, and they make their own choices based on what's going on in the world around them. Welcome to the world of Oblivion.
In May 2005, Oblivion was announced and was one of the most hyped and anticipated games of the time. Initially exclusive to PC and Xbox, Sony wished to jump onto the hype train and have their own immense RPG to compete with. From Software, a Japanese game development company, at the time had made quite a few RPGs, this being the Kingsfield franchise, which even bore some resemblance to the Elder Scrolls franchise. Sony only wanted an Oblivion clone out from Software. Instead, however, Hidetaka Miyazaki, current creative director from Software, wanted to go into a new direction towards the dark fantasy genre. In turn, both in Demon's Souls as well as the start of a unique twist into the character-centric theme.
And close shut the jaws of Oblivion.
Demon's Souls is the beginning of From Software's unique narrative style of storytelling that is found within all of From Software's RPGs. This stems from creative director Hidetaka Miyazaki's upbringing, where much of his childhood was spent playing adventure game books instead of video games. The storytelling from this game and all further developed games after this follow a trend of heavy reliance on environmental storytelling. This assists when the development process intends for the player to discover the story on their own rather than directly told. Miyazaki says in Eurogamer's interview titled Soul Survivor, "I don't provide explicit explanations in the game because I believe it compels the players to dig deeper. The essence of this game lies in the thrill of unraveling the mysteries for yourself." He further goes on to say, "A world where every rule is laid bare can be mundane, so I crafted a world that felt enigmatic. I want you to exercise your imagination and interpret it to some extent." Finally, co-creator and publisher Kaji says, "Our approach was to deliberately avoid a pre-established narrative. There isn't a pre-defined story unfolding before you, instead the experience centers around you and the choices you make step by step." I believe these quotes to be From Software's fundamental ground base towards not only the narrative design, but also towards their root in a more character-centric narrative structure. Despite From Software and Miyazaki's effort, the game's success on initial releases, especially with Japanese audience, wasn't what they had hoped for. The situation seemed dire, Miyazaki said himself. During the period just after development, the evaluation and sales forecasts within From Software were not promising, so I cannot even imagine being given another chance to develop a similar game again. Although there was grief, the game, in spite of initial sales, gained a cult following, and upon Western releases, the game finally gained attention it deserved, gaining a reputation for its punishing difficulty and obscure story. With the success of Demon's Souls, fans were wondering if there would be a sequel. Miyazaki replies, "As an employee of the company, I cannot say if there will be a follow-up. However, from a personal standpoint, I believe we learned many valuable lessons during the game's creation, and there were numerous aspects we couldn't fully explore the first time." Despite this, Sony had given up both From Software and Demon Souls. However, with the eventual success and fans' cry for more, Bandai Namco partnered back up with From Software on making a similar spiritual successor. They couldn't use the Demon Souls name because that was owned by Sony, so they had to make something new. From the period of February 2009 to October 2009, 8 months of development, Miyazaki and his team worked on their new project tirelessly to eventual release in September 2011, where they shared their new IP to the world, Dark Souls.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark. Then from the dark they came and found the souls of lords within the flame. Nito, the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters of Chaos. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, and his faithful knights. And the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten. With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons. Gwyn's mighty bolts peeled apart their stone scales. The witches weaved great firestorms. Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease. And Seath the Scaleless betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the Age of Fire. But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers, and man sees not light, but only endless nights. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark sign.
Dark Souls is an action role-playing game made in the late 2011. Developed by the Japanese game company From Software, by this point no one had really heard of this game company. At the very least those who had recognised it as almost indie, their main IP at the time in a recognisable state being Armored Core, a mech shooter game, and their 2 RPG game series, Kinsfield, and the grandfather and progenitor to Dark Souls, Demon Souls. Throughout Dark Souls' community, the game gained multiple reputations in a rather unique manner. Depending on who you talk to, the game responses to the game and what is enjoyed from them could be completely different. One of those sides of the community I wish to cover the most is the lore and/or story. Dark Souls, similar to its predecessor, followed the same narrative design, relying on the player to figure out the story for themselves through discovery, research, and interpretation. Because of this, the game's story isn't strictly a set truth, making much of my analysis mere interpretations. Nevertheless, I believe Dark Souls to be a character-centric game, and I wish to put that into form. I felt it was important to share the intro for Dark Souls earlier, as I believe it is important to know, as it is the very same information the game gives you. The game as a whole does not share very much with you, this being one of the few cinematics the game very openly tells you what has happened and what is going to happen. It is additionally important to note what exactly character-centric is, this being a character-centric approach in media storytelling and game design focused on the development, personality, and emotional depth of characters. The narrative is driven by their experiences, choices, and relationships. Dark Souls relates to this theme as an RPG. Although unlike traditional RPGs where the world revolves around a grand narrative, Dark Souls is distinctly a dying world, a prophecy of the chosen undead, although being a stereotype of a lot of RPGs, this idea of a chosen protagonist. In this game, it is just mere propaganda, almost fake. Only those who even acknowledge the legend as any sort of truth or seriousness only acknowledge it for the sake of using your character as a tool. The most prominent we see this in is in characters like Kinseeker Frampt, who actively manipulates your character into linking the fire and continuing the cycle. Dark Souls centers its themes around individual characters, their motivations, their failures, and their cyclical struggles. The idea that everyone repeats the same mistake, this is predominantly seen, especially in the DLC, as well as the endings for the game, as your choices are end the cycle or embrace the dark. The game's narrative, worldbuilding, and emotional depth all stem from the inner lives and fates of its characters, making it a profound example of character-centric storytelling in interactive media. I feel the most important case towards the character-centric narrative in this game is towards the heart of the game, which is it is a decaying world teetering on the edge of ruin. This world is mirrored in almost every NPC the player encounter. Each character is defined not by their heroic deeds, but their slow descent into despair, madness, or irrelevance. For example, Slayer of Astora, a fan favourite, begins as a hopeful, valiant knight seeking his own son or purpose. Over time, however, his journey reflects the game's central motive of hollowing a loss of self and purpose. It is also a metaphor for depression, unless the player intervenes, of course. Slayer's personal struggle becomes emblematic of the larger narrative, that of individuals searching for meaning in a world that no longer provides it. This motive is reinforced by other tragic arcs like Siegmeyer, Laurentis, Rhea. Each of these characters begins with clear motivations, yet their quests ultimately lead to disillusionment, madness, or death. These are not side characters in the traditional sense, rather their stories are critical to understand the thematic core of Dark Souls. The world exists as a backdrop for these personal stories to take place, and their outcome depends in part on the player's engagement, reinforcing the intimacy of their arcs, also the connection to the character's player character. And honestly, the most important part about these questlines is how it plays into the endings and that greater choice at the end, but I'll talk about that more later. It's important to touch on the player character, who is only known as the chosen undead. It is intentionally left as a blank slate and used in this stereotypical narrative that you see in RPGs where it's the chosen one. This allows players' actions to serve as a reflection of their values and responses to the world's decay, as well as playing into the RPG aspect, allowing the player to make the protagonist their own, coming up with their own reasons or backstories for the character. The idea of this blank slate really gives the character more chances to explore who their character might be. While the overarching plot, Link in the Fire or Usher in the Age of Dark, might suggest a binary choice, the true weight of the decision comes from the context built by the characters around the player. Are you continuing the cycle of sacrifice that doomed Gwyn and all of the other NPCs that you meet along the game, or breaking it? Especially interesting is how breaking the cycle leads to the Age of Dark. It's kept purposely ambiguous. It sounds ominous, yet depending on how the player was affected through interacting with the NPCs of the game, you might actually find yourself leaning towards it, as it would end the cycle that caused so much suffering. The player's final choice is deeply informed by the stories and fates that they have encountered. This is most seen through quest lines, each one making you think whether or not this is worth fighting for, or alternatively, it will reinforce your decision to link the fire and continue this cycle, as it's almost bringing meaning to the sacrifices that you have met along the way. Throughout Dark Souls, the game never tells the player who they are, instead of leaving that up to the mind of the player, playing into the role-playing standards behind RPGs, but rather what the player is. The player actively defines the player as the chosen undead. Interesting enough, most NPCs in this game do not address the player in such a way. Only a few chosen do. It plays into the greater story that it is just merely a story, a legend designed to lead undead into Link in the Fire to continue the age for everyone else. It's propaganda, it's not true. But it's interesting how the game doesn't really talk about how other characters being referred to as the chosen undead. And it's even placed into some of the cut content of the game where there used to be an NPC who would follow your story alongside you and do the other ending with you. You'd have to fight him at the end over the choice of which ending is right. And it was always very interesting to me why they cut that, because I feel like it plays into this, not only the character centric, but also the chosen undead motive. Further reinforces how it is fake. The fact that someone else is doing the exact same thing as you alongside you really undermines what you're doing, which plays into the dark world you live in. Additionally, Dark Souls throughout the story only really tells its story through minimal exposition, choosing instead to tell its story through dialogue snippets, item descriptions, and environmental storytelling. This design forces players to piece together the narrative through the lens of the characters they meet, making those individuals central to not just the story, but for the experience of playing the game. The richness of the game world is thus not in its plot, but in the interior lives of its inhabitants. This is especially true when it comes to the game's history, as we see the world at its worst. We have no idea when the world was still operable, or whether or not it was a just or kind world, further making the final choice of the game all the more difficult, as you never experience the world's peak. You only ever hear from it from either stories being told or from dialogue being read. In conclusion, Dark Souls embodies a character-centric theme by focusing on the personal narratives of its NPCs and the player side by side. Through a tapestry of loss, perseverance, existential questioning, these characters elevate the game's dark world into something profoundly human. Their struggles become the emotional and thematic anchors of the game, making Dark Souls a character study as much as it is an action RPG. It feels to me like the most obscure character-centric game in my eyes, as when you think of character-centric games, you often think of Last of Us, God of War, you think about these two characters that follow alongside, but character-centric is almost every RPG. Fallout New Vegas is character-centric. Everything is dictated by the NPCs there and the decisions they make. You are just the catalyst. And Dark Souls is almost the same. Everything was already set in motion and was set to happen. You're just there to give this world the final push before the end. And that is something profoundly beautiful.
My lord, bless thy safe return. Let Kath and Framt serve your highness. We are here to serve your highness. Let true dark be cast upon the world. Our Lord hath returned.